Tickly! Tickly! Came the eldritch mocking cry, and everyone was scared. Welcome to Book Boys. Phil, how are you doing?
Can I laugh now? I'm doing
laugh.
Okay. Before Nick started that intro, he was like, I've got something. Don't laugh." I was really hoping that there was more coming after Tickly. I was hoping you wouldn't just let me hang there. Like, no, it's your turn.
I was hoping for something else as well.
Yeah.
But it's pretty early in the morning here in Japan.
It is 11:30 p.m. in Germany.
Yeah. It's actually 7:30 here, which is not a time to complain that much about, but I've been up for a little while. I'm a sleepy boy.
I'm
so
in
Phil,
a completely empty fucking room in a completely new flat. So, yeah. Things are looking up for my thumbs. I don't know
what that means.
I don't know what I'm saying.
Stick them up your bum.
What are we reading this week, Nick?
This week we have a special spooky book. It's not Halloween anymore, but we're kind of, keen for something a bit spookier than normal. So we've gone for the short story by H.P. Lovecraft called At the Mountains of Madness.
Yes.
This book was released in 1931. I think it was originally serialized. And is, I think it's one of Lovecraft's kind of earlier works, and we came across it. I came across it in the introduction to Haunting Hill House when we were reading for that previous episode. If you're interested, go and check it out. But it came up in the introduction, and it really sort of tickled my fancy, and
it tickled your fancy.
It tickled my fancy. It was really, really highly rated in this book introduction. So I thought, I'd never read any Lovecraft before, and we'd never talked about Lovecraft much
same.
on this. Oh, so it was the first Lovecraft book for you as well.
Yeah.
So the way that it's described in the introduction here is Lovecraft, who's a great admirer of Poe, sets out to riff on the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, which is a Edgar Allan Poe story. But then he stumbles into uncharted territory by hinting through science and revelations at the darkest possible origin of mankind. A group of scientists embark on a fossil hunt to the frozen edges of the globe. Utilizing cutting-edge technology and tools, they attempt to catalogue and decipher the evolutionary clues found in fossils and remains that are gradually revealed to them. They
like drilling and blowing shit up.
That was definitely worth interrupting the quote.
Sorry.
They stumble upon the ruins of a cyclopean alien city. It is there that it is revealed that an ancient race of extraterrestrials... ... I'm not going to finish that off. So, it takes this book is interesting. It kind of takes the form of a kind of like a confession from the kind of protagonist, who is a geologist, part of an expedition in the Antarctic, and it kind of begins with him, essentially writing from in reflection of the events that happened, and saying, I come and I confess, and I will tell you everything that happened, whether you believe me or not. So it all happens after the fact, and it's interesting in that way, I guess. It's not like a typical, it's more like a what's the word? An actual kind of article from within this world, rather than a piece of literature which is kind of, just
omniscient narrator kind of
exactly
stuff.
Yeah. So what was your general kind of impressions on this?
So I started reading it, and immediately I really liked it.
Yeah.
And then that kind of I got less enthusiastic as I went through it. We'll get to that. But what really hooked me at first was just the setting of the world. It was really awesome. And there was obviously also stuff relating to navigation and, you know, ships and all that. So that was interesting for me. But yeah, and you never really think of the Antarctic. So the setting, by the way, is the Antarctic. These guys, they go from America to the Antarctic to conduct their research, and you know, as they enter all these places, the Ross Island or something is like something I think I remember, or this mountain and that mountain, which are places you've never heard of, but they actually do exist if you look on the map, which will enhance your reading experience if you actually track down where they go while reading. It's quite fun. And yeah, it definitely made me want to go there. And you know, this genre of like ancient kind of lost civilization has been, I think, chewed to death in so much media, from video games to like drama series or whatever. But this book did it in a really interesting way. And yeah, just this idea that deep within the ice of the Antarctic, there's actually all this ancient shit that predates human history. Yeah. You know, it's I don't know, it's very cool to think about, and it doesn't seem to be like it's like something that you can wrap your head around, and that could have a sense of reality, because you know, even nowadays there are some research bases, but you know, no one really lives deep in the Antarctic, so
yeah,
it does have a kind of mystery to it.
I kind of just to riff on that point, I also really so the book is like I said before, was published in 1931, but it's recalling events that happened in like 1930 apparently. So it's not it's not like a science fiction story. It's what I'm trying to or not like a future set like perspective like science fiction story, even though obviously it deals with extraterrestrial aliens. So as like a reader today in 2024, kind of reading about the equipment, for example, and the techniques that they used to, for example, when they're navigating this alien city that they discover, they use pieces of paper to kind of track where they're going. They put pieces of paper on the floor, which I guess is like an old kind of like spelunking, like cave exploring technique. And, you know, him describing, is it Shackleton? Like old Antarctic explorers and stuff. And you get like a real sense of like place and time, and it's reflected in things like those technologies that they use and the ways that they combat living in this environment. And so it was quite a unique experience for me, because I do quite like sci-fi. I do quite like science fiction, and whilst this isn't, I guess it is kind of a science fiction book in a way. It was very grounded, and it also felt like a real kind of honest window into the 1930s, I guess.
And I like that it didn't talk about like I like that it didn't talk about war or like politics at the time or anything.
Right.
Like, oh, what are those Germans up to? Or like, I don't know, whoever is president in the 1930s in the US. I don't even fucking know. But,
sure.
Like that would have kind of, I don't know, ruined it for me, I guess. I don't know why, but it made it feel like this is in the like parallel kind of universe to this one that where it could actually happen. I don't know. It felt quite real, and it was very immersive in that sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
So, I guess I'll give a very kind of brief summary. I know we've already kind of given a brief summary, but of the events of this book, we have obviously these explorers arriving in the Antarctic. They're setting up, they're digging with these tools. And then one person who's part of the party called Lake, he comes across this ginormous mountain range, which is like described as being bigger than Everest. And after setting up camp there, separated from the main group, him and his team start digging to find, various geological things to study. And then they come across this whole underground world of, deceased animals and vegetables and foliage that no human has ever seen before, including these ginormous, weird alien things. And
yes, this is where I got confused. Maybe you can clear this up for me. So It sounded to me like they were finding fossils, but then all of a sudden they were finding like actual real dead things that must have died not too long ago. Is that what?
From my impression, they found like perfectly preserved dead animals,
like
that weren't
encapsulated
necessarily
in ice.
Yeah, they weren't necessarily fossilized.
Okay.
They were just kind of that was kind of what was happening, I think.
They were cutting them up and shit and removing parts. So
Yeah. So, they make this like, insane discovery, having found these ginormous aliens, which they can barely even kind of like wrap their heads around. And then the next day, when everyone's trying to meet Lake, there's radio silence and they don't hear from Lake. And eventually when they get there, in a bit of a scare, they find that the whole camp has been destroyed, basically. And there's no trace of any of the team. So this crew now fly over the kind of crest of the mountain and discover this horrifying, huge, big city, which is, they realize is connected to these aliens. And they go down and they explore it. And in doing so, they kind of learn more about this world, and the kind of horror of this discovery deepens. So the main thing kind of driving this narrative are these like continued discoveries. So, obviously it's an expedition and these people are trying to learn about the world. They're digging to, it's a geological study. But what we kind of find again in this book is that, we're coming across all these really, really unexpected things. And in this book, they're all described as kind of horrible and terrifying and like sickening and all very, 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 very negative, described in very negative terms. And I think the kind of like essence of this book is like the horror of discovery, or like,
Yeah, so the big element I think comes in when they find the fossils or whatever those things were, and they, because they're geologists, so they find certain irrefutable evidence that shows that these things existed long before people did, or before or before we even thought that animals like formed. Amphibians, came out of the water and evolved into dinosaurs or whatever. They were convinced that these things must have been much earlier, and then it immediately gets linked to the Necronomicon and kind of this Lovecraftian universe of monsters. There's like one guy in the team, apparently has read a bunch of stuff about the Necronomicon, and he references this because he's like, oh, these monsters actually look like the thing in the Necronomicon, and all these, you know, all this H.P. Lovecraft monster lore comes into it quite early.
Very early.
Yeah. And I was still pretty hooked at that point because I had never read Lovecraft, and the setting was good, the atmosphere was good. The discovery immediately was interesting because let's talk about the monster they find, right? So they find these, and you should look this up. Google Mountain of Madness monster or starfish monster. So these things are like barrel-shaped, big vegetable animal things with kind of a starfish-shaped big head with additional tentacles. And feet that also look like that, a bunch of tube-like tentacles and wings, and they could dwell in the water and on land. So they do really look like kind of in between plant and animal, which makes them seem kind of pre-evolution-ish. And so that part was really interesting. Should I just go on where it doesn't get so interesting anymore, or do you want to input anything?
So I kind of want to you carry on with your point, and I'll chime in because I might be taking it a bit in a different direction.
Okay. So this is in like the first third of the book that we just mentioned. They find these things, and then the book goes on, and not much really happens, to be honest. They explore these caves, and they find out that these things were intelligent, maybe even more intelligent than humans. And they also built a city, and they found this lost city of ice that was fossilized or something. And they just go through it and say how creepy this is. And then eventually they find this smoke monster that chases them at the end, basically.
Yes. Slime thing.
Yeah, and he spends a lot of time explaining, like, kind of inner monologuing how did the shutters of these windows freeze over, and they're still preserved with the hinges of the windows, and
in
that's really fucking spooky.
Yeah.
It's another one of those the house evilly situations that we had.
This is exactly yeah. So in The Haunting of Hill House, just to what Phil's referring to is in this previous episode, when we read Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. There were, even though she's like this profound horror writer, regarded as one of a really influential horror writer, there were still many points in that book where you were just kind of told that this thing is scary, and it's like you don't have any kind of like opportunity to come to arrive at that conclusion yourself. It's more just like, the house evilly, and you just kind of have to accept that. And in the same, honestly, this book does that to death. It's like it's so egregious in this whole book. It's so just every time you are told of something, it's like, just the most horrifying, grotesque, disgusting thing. And I say that, right, and you're like, okay, what could you possibly be talking about that could be, horrifying, grotesque, disgusting? And it's like, the guy's just talking about the shape of a room or something. It's literally as like arbitrary or just, plain as that. And, on that note as well.
Into that. Sorry,
go ahead.
What is this? We're talking over each other. So not only is there a lot of, the wall looks evil in its frozen over state. Oh, I'm so scared kind of thing. But we're also there, the kind of H.P. Lovecraft reputation. We're all here for the monsters. We want to see the monster. You've been telling us about this monster for like 70 pages. You've been describing it, how it lives, speculating about how it could have evolved, where it comes from. They probably come from outer space long before life evolved on Earth, all this shit. We want to see the fucking monster. But that never really happens. So, like at the end, they get probably chased by one, but they never see it. It's like there's smoke and noises behind us, so we ran, the end. And it's like the whole book has been hyping up for this conflict scene where the monster shows up, and it never happens. And I think another factor that kept expectations low also is that he mentions, first of all, since he's writing after the fact, we know that the main guy survives anyway. But then he also has his partner with him, who he also mentions pretty much at the beginning and keeps reiterating that the guy also survives, that he's like not over his trauma. And so we know everyone is dead except these two guys, but we know nothing's going to happen to them. So we're just waiting for the monster to show up. Never really does. And then the another thing is that this other guy, I forgot his name, Dan something D, Dan something.
Is it Diath? What's his name?
I think it's something Dan, but whatever. He has no.
Dan,
that's not.
Danforth,
it's not even a character, right? Yeah, Danforth. That's it. The guy is with him. He's like, oh, Danforth is also behind me, and then he just goes into like 10 pages of inner monologue. Danforth never speaks. We never hear any lines from him. We never hear any input. He's not a character. He's just this main character. Might as well be doing this whole thing alone, and telling us about his wife at home. That's how much of a presence Danforth has in this book.
100%. So just a note on the aliens themselves. So there are two different aliens being referred to in this book. The ones that are first discovered, those weird kind of like barrel-shaped vegetable animal things with starfish-shaped head and weird wings. These are later referred to as the Old Ones, and they're described as like this ancient alien species that came from space and lived on Earth, and maybe even created life on Earth. I think that's what's explained in the book. But also, the alien that chases them at the end is this thing called the Shoggoth, which is a creation of the Old Ones. They were originally like the beasts of burden for the Old Ones, and they were enslaved. They were enslaved by the Old Ones, but eventually, I think maybe either through some kind of evolution or through some other means, ended up becoming a threat to the Old Ones, and that's the reason why the Old Ones left this this place. I think that's the narrative that's explained in the book. Just to clarify.
That's also weird because we come into this completely blank slate, and all of a sudden, somewhere around the middle of the book, we get bombarded with all this Lovecraftian Cthulhu stuff, and if you're not familiar with this world, then this doesn't mean anything to you. And this whole also like how these Old Ones made the Shoggoth or whatever it's not really explained to us. We basically get the main character saying, I'm gonna explain it all in a monograph. Let me just say right now, this is pretty spooky.
Yes. Oh yeah. It's like I'm not sure if I can bear to write this down.
Yeah, so at parts I didn't even know, is he talking about the Old Ones? Is he talking about the Shoggoth? I don't even know what's happening, because he's like skipping in between all this stuff, and it's like, oh, and they probably were also fought with the abominable snowmen at the land of Wei Ming, and I'm like, what is all this shit?
Yeah. It gets way too, like, what's the word? It's just masturbatory at some point. Like, you can just tell he's just really loving talking about the aliens. It feels like he's cornered you at like a party. And he's had a couple too many cocktails, and he just really wants to talk about aliens.
That's exactly how I felt. Yeah.
So also, yeah, this chapter that you're referring to, what it does, it just explains the whole history of these aliens, and it's so boring and so it has no fucking source. And
I'm so glad you dropped the B word.
It was genuinely, I don't know. It just wasn't like literary, I guess, is like. And he's kind of shielded himself from criticism in a way here, because this whole book is actually just it's a fictional account, and the text is itself like fictional. It's not, as we said before, like an omniscient narrator. It's actually a fictional text. So, you can't, it's like, Lovecraft would probably say, well, it's not me who's a boring writer, it's the guy that's a boring writer.
No one. That's too cheap of a cop-out. He wouldn't use that, I
think. Well, he'd have to accept it then. But, when we think of, like, horror and, the horror genre, like, intrigue is so important. And this book does so little to kind of like attempt to create intrigue. At least like kind of later on in the book, you're really kind of like desperately holding out for some kind of revelation or something to happen, and it ends up falling apart so quickly.
But what's nice at the beginning is that you really are in the moment, because most of the words on the page are actually about what's happening right now, where we're going next, what we're going to do there. But from the middle of the book, most of it is like inner monologue and him like speculating. And I'm like 3 pages of him like talking about some idea he had. And then you're like, wait, where are we? Are we still like, have you entered the ice city yet? Are we in front of the mountain? Are we on the mountain? I don't even know where we are. And then it's just like, right. And then in one sentence he cleans up like, and then we went through the ice city and down the cave, and then it goes into another monologue. I'm like, like I'm not in the scene.
Yeah. So another thing that I wanted to like talk about as well was this whole, like we kind of mentioned it before, but this horror of discovery, and I think there's something that's really incompatible about this idea and like how it was executed, either in his decision to make this like a fictional account, or whether it's just like his writing style generally that just doesn't work with this. But like and this whole idea of like these incomprehensible horrors. But we as we already said, like everything that is discovered is considered like horrifying. So I've got a quote here. It's from, I think, chapter 5, yeah. This is, I think, when they first discover the city. So it describes them going over the plateau of the mountain, I think. And I'll give you kind of an abridged quote here. The effect of the monstrous sight was indescribable, for some fiendish violation of no natural law seemed certain at the outset. Here, on a hellishly ancient tableland fully 200,000 feet high, and in a climate deadly to habitation since a pre-human age, not less than 5,000 years ago, there stretched, nearly to the vision's limit, a tangle of orderly stone which only the desperation of mental self-defense could possibly attribute to any but a conscious and artificial cause. The sway of reason seemed irrefutably shaken, for this cyclopean maze of squared, curved, and angled blocks had features which cut off all comfortable refuge. It was clearly the city of the mirage in stark, objective, and ineluctable reality. So, you discover this city, and your kind of first, like, thought is not like, oh my god, this is incredible. Like, what are we finding here? This is like mind-blowing. Maybe it's a bit scary, but it's not all like bad. But in kind of with every discovery in this book, Lovecraft's like, oh, it's just grotesque, it's awful, I feel sick. I feel terrible.
That as well, but also if you want to put the reader into this scene, you would be like, whoa, those blocks right there look really fucking artificial. That couldn't be formed naturally, right? Us as geologists would know this, right, Mr. Daneforth? And then Daneforth would say something, and then they're like, oh shit, this must have been made by someone. Instead, we get, it's indescribable, like a mirage that blew my mind into a million pieces, curves and angles, and I actually have no fucking idea what I'm looking at. Like, if you want to describe a scene to me, don't say it's indescribable. That's not helpful.
But okay, that's a really good point, and this is what I wanted to go on to. So, the reason that this doesn't work is because this whole like what he does in constantly throughout the these discoveries throughout the book is it begins with this statement, which is like, this thing is indescribably horrible and big, and I can't even possibly think about it. I don't want to talk about it on the page, but I'm gonna do it anyway. It's so it goes from that to then giving a very sterile, completely emotionless description of what we're looking at. So to follow on from the point earlier, we now have this very kind of scientific materialist description, which goes as following. The nameless stone labyrinth consisted for the most part of walls from 10 to 150 feet in ice-clear height, and of a thickness varying from 5 to 10 feet. It was composed mostly of prodigious blocks of dark primordial slate, schist, and sandstone. Blocks in many cases as large as 4 by 6 by 8 feet, though in several places it seemed to be carved out of a solid, uneven bed of Precambrian slate. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on about the measurements of these things. And it's the same when they describe the alien in the beginning as well, when they first discover the alien. This giant, really lengthy, schematic description of this alien. And I think one of the reasons why there is such, good artistic renditions of this alien is because he's literally just kind of like described exactly what it looks like, how many things come off it, and whatever.
I was still pretty okay with that because it was this novel thing, this alien, and I was kind of invested in knowing how it looks. But the dimension of ice blocks didn't hit the same way.
But my point generally is that, like, where does the horror actually occur? So we have this, like, we're told that this thing exists in the beginning, and then it's terrifying, and then it's described to us in a way that is not really terrifying. It's like, and in terms of like this discovery rationalization thing, it also just like makes me feel like the protagonist is just this, like, it feels more like the horror is happening within him than actually in the world itself. Because he sees something, he's like, oh my god, no, this is so bad. And then he's like, oh, actually, it's 3 feet wide and it's 10 feet tall, and it's got this thing here and this thing there, and now I understand it. So it's like this,
right, yeah.
The horror of not being able to understand something, the horror of not being able to comprehend something. At the beginning, when he sees the city, it's like, it stretches further than I can see. And it's like this, it's just terrifying in its size. And then it's like, oh no, we actually kind of can see the edge of it now, and we can kind of make a guess about how, big it is. And then it's like the next thing is that they get inside and they're like, oh my god, it's so deep, I'm so scared, it's so deep, I don't know how far it goes. And then it's like they eventually find, all this information about the city, and then they're not scared anymore. And it's like, man, like, you know, take care of your fucking heart. Like, you're gonna have a heart attack if you keep going on like this. Like, just chill the fuck out. It's just so annoying. I just found it not scary or not like
the highest mountain, higher than Mount Everest. It must be the tallest thing that could be conceived. It must be somewhere around here, but it's further than we can see. It must be about 300 meters away.
Yeah, I just found that super annoying and frustrating the whole time, and I just didn't know. I just couldn't feel where the horror was or where I was supposed to be scared.
So I think the two scary things are supposed to come from that Lake's team was completely dead and mangled and cut open when they came there, and they should have gone into a bit more detail about that, I feel, because what state the bodies were in, why it was so scary, because we spent more time on the dimension of ice blocks, I think, than on that. And the second element of horror is supposed to come from this like hidden knowledge about the Necronomicon and all this Lovecraftian mythology, which to a first-time reader makes no fucking sense at all, because he's like, if they just found some ancient vegetable, that would be pretty interesting and not scary. But the scary part comes from the fact that it evolved before humans could have evolved. Therefore, it must have come from space, and their own mythology that they find painted on the walls confirms that. And also that was what's written in whatever the Necronomicon or whatever other book that this other guy called Daneforth apparently read, but the main protagonist didn't read it, but he's still able to lecture about it for some reason. And so we find in this discovery a kind of confirmation of all this satanic-ish mythology that is not explained to us. So it's like, I don't know, imagine you believe your whole life that Santa Claus is not real, and then you go to wouldn't be the Antarctic, but let's say you go to the Antarctic and you find Santa Claus's factory, and you're like, holy shit, Santa Claus is real. This completely contradicts everything we know about like the lifespan of humans and, you know, physics, I guess. Like, it makes no sense. It breaks natural law as we know it. But if you had no idea what Santa Claus is, like, let's call it Schmermply Permp, you know, like, if you're the reader and he goes to the, like, south to Antarctica, and he's like, holy shit, Schmermply Permp is real. And I'm like, what the fuck is Schmermply Permp? Like, that's how I felt, you know?
Excellent observation.
This horrible thing that they all talk about is real. And like, what is the thing?
Perfectly said. I mean, on the note of the Necronomicon as well, I thought it was so lazy how it was just kind of like from the very beginning of the book, you know, talking about, like, you know, generating intrigue, which is, I feel like, you know, it's pretty unanimously agreed on. Like, you want to have a bit of intrigue in your book, and he does this, you know, kind of. I mean, in the writing in the beginning, it is really interesting, but as soon as the aliens are found, there are references to the fucking Necronomicon, and it's like,
it felt so forced, you know.
It's so it's like we've came across this five star like shaped object. I don't know if this is actually this was actually made in reference to the Necronomicon, but it's like we came across this thing, and which reminded me far too uncomfortably of the old Necronomicon, blah blah blah. And then it's just constantly this like thing is brought back up, and you're like, oh, I wonder why they're talking about this thing called the Necronomicon.
Yeah, it's like wink, wink. This is gonna come up later. Like, yeah.
Is it because this whole book is this whole Necronomicon is going to incidentally explain everything? Like, and so from the very beginning, we're already just told exactly what everything is. So then you're just like, why? I'm just here to kind of read your description of you getting to that point. But, this is already, written after the fact, so I already know that you survive. So I know that you survive. I know that, everything that you're going to discover. So I'm just, like, following you going through this thing and then speaking at me. And on that note as well, there's this whole thing we haven't talked about yet, which really, 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 really pissed me off and was so lazy. This whole science fiction is really has a big kind of, this is like such a typical case in science fiction when you have, like, you're dealing with an alien species. It's this idea of scale. So, is this alien species, is it bigger than you can comprehend, or is it something that you can comprehend? And, like, there's always this issue, I think, in science fiction where the people that are writing about alien species or writing about this incomprehensible world really feel the need to try and make it comprehensible. And they'll do this in all different kinds of ways, but one of the most kind of common things is, like, there's some kind of motif that's repeated. And there are two things I want to talk about. One of them is a motif. The second is, like, their kind of habitat or their architecture and stuff like that. So the motif, the thing we have in this book, is this 5-pointed star thing, which is an object that you see all throughout. It's when they find the aliens in the beginning, they find these, like, weird 5-pointed star-shaped objects. And then throughout the city as well, they also see, built into the architecture, for example, there are these 5-pointed star shapes.
I had low-key, like, Jung vibes when Jung was talking about, like, triangles.
What are you talking about?
It's like, when we read, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when we read Man and His Symbols, and Jung was talking about, holy shit, mandala is like a circle, right? But have you ever thought about in ancient times when people also had circles? Bro, it's connected. And it's, I don't know, I was feeling
right.
You've got this pentagon shape, basically, or a 5-pointed star shaped thing, and then he, like, goes on to say, like, oh, there's another 5-pointed thing. That's pretty fucking spooky, right? And it's like, I don't know, it just could be a thing with 5 ends. I don't know.
I think the implication here is that this 5-pointed star is some kind of motif.
Right.
Like, but an identity of these, part of the identity of these aliens. But the question I have is, in human society today, like, can you point to one symbol that is, like, completely ubiquitous throughout our whole society, in our architecture, in our design, in our art, in, something that kind of, like, sums up humans? Is there, like, a thing?
Right, this felt like a very handy narrative thing to use. Like, oh, they were going to make these things all about 5-pointed things, but in reality, that probably wouldn't be how a society would be organized.
Yeah, and so, what does this do? Does this make the aliens seem more advanced, or does it make them seem less advanced? In my opinion, it seems like a society, I think, advancement, or, like, it's defined more by complexity and diversity than this sort of, like, idea. It's like, oh, it's this 5-pointed stars everywhere. Maybe you could say like a national flag, but even then, I don't think they're like, if you walk down the street in most countries, you're not really going to encounter them. So that really is, it's such a common problem in science fiction, and it was just disappointing to see that here. But another thing that was
okay.
The other thing
I haven't read much science fiction, so I didn't really.
I just think, I don't know. I think you'll see it a lot more if you just watching or reading science fiction.
Sorry, tell me about the other thing.
So the other thing, and again, just convenient narrative tools. Inside this kind of labyrinthian alien cave city, what do they discover inside? They find that the place is basically ransacked. There's nothing inside. Aliens have taken everything with them. And we just have this kind of interconnected cave system. And conveniently, on the walls of apparently basically everywhere in this cave city are sculptures that describe the entire history of the species and like all of their knowledge and education and everything. So, and in spite of how vast this city is, the author is able to deduce basically, an entire summary of this alien species existence, just from the small amount of buildings that they end up going through. And on top of that, he's actually able to understand it, even though it's supposed to be this alien thing. He's just like, I can somehow read this and digest it and give you a perfect like history of these aliens.
I felt like they went from, are these vegetables or are these animals, to, they also had a kind of show with Breaking Bad, but they had a different main character.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like he deduces everything about their society, and like, they also make topiary and bake cakes. I see. They're very advanced. So very interesting indeed.
But also, what does it tell you? What does it tell you about an alien species that, like, they have their whole history written on a wall on the walls of their buildings? Like, if you came across like, can you imagine that in human society? Like, you have your home right now, right? Okay, your home has the entire history of, I don't know, the Sony Walkman. It just explains the whole history of the Sony Walkman, and it just happens so that your house is the house that has that explained on the wall. And it's like, or even it might even be something relevant to you. I don't know. It's just, now suddenly it's like you're just thinking like, okay, this is my apartment, so like, why would it have that?
I mean, they kind of explained that a bit. He was saying, like, I guess they're organized kind of socialistically because their whole society seems to be in this one city center. They don't seem to be interested in spreading their society anywhere, and it's kind of like, it's a very communal kind of living situation, and their politics seem to be also structured that way. But so I kind of get how I get both points. I get your point, but I also can see how you can explain that away. But I also think that like, these like hive mind societies. I mean, okay, he was writing in 1931, so maybe it wasn't nearly as much of a cliche as it is now. But like, it's just so convenient for storytelling to say that all these aliens think the same, even though they're apparently really advanced. They think the same so much that they're all happy with having this, single narrative history written on their walls. Right. Okay. Yeah.
And whereas, if you were writing about humans, which are, it's not explicitly said, but I mean, they're considered. Part of the horror here is that these aliens, we don't know how advanced they are, or they seem incredibly advanced, and we can't understand how they've managed to create this city, and but in spite of that, they still have this like inexplainably simple society, just something that's so easy to grasp. And then of course there's the real bottom line, which is like, ask anyone about history, ask 10 people about the history of one thing, and they'll all give you different ideas on it. So it's like, how how come we just take this narrative for granted, and it doesn't feel like it's actually like it doesn't feel like it's actually set in a real world, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Okay. I want to move away from this point, but I understand what you mean. Yeah, and I guess that also subtracts from this very in the scene kind of this could actually happen feeling at the beginning of the book that later kind of fell apart, I think. There was another funny, I was thinking about the Haunting of Hill House episode we did, and in the middle or in the last like quarter of that book, we get introduced to two new characters, the wife and Arthur. And we had a similar situation here almost, where we have these two boys. The one doesn't even speak, so we really only have the inner monologue of the main character. And then he's talking about the star-shaped monster. So that's what we're concerned with all the time. And then all of a sudden, the only thing they actually meet that's alive are these penguins.
Oh, God, yeah.
And he's like, oh, no, it's so the noise is so horrible. Because it's a noise that we're so familiar with. And they're like, what? And then he's like, to cut to the chase, they're penguins. And it's like these big
6-foot penguins.
Yeah, it's these big albino blind penguins that are described as like screaming and walking around confusedly. And they have literally no function at all in the whole thing. Like, it's just kind of like, oh, and here are the penguins.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes it even more lame because the monster that chases them at the end, again, we never see it. We don't even really know if it's there or not. But the only thing we've actually met in this ancient civilization are these penguins, which have no function.
Yeah.
It's just felt so weird. Like, I don't know.
Also, to reference back to this, like, real obnoxious, like, incessant referencing to the Necronomicon, here's a description of when they find them. In fact, I'm going to read a little bit further back.
Don't laugh now.
Basically, they see this bulky white shape looming ahead of them. This white waddling thing was fully 6 feet high, yet we seemed to realize at once that it was not one of those others. Then came a flash of anticlimax as the white shape sidled into a lateral archway to our left to join two others of its kind which had summoned it in raucous tones. For it was only a penguin, albeit of a huge unknown species larger than the greatest of the known king penguins, and monstrous in its combined albinism and virtual eyelessness. ... Their size reminded us of some of the archaic penguins depicted in the Old Ones sculptures, and it did not take us long to conclude that they were descended from the same stock. So it's just like, oh, okay. Their size, the penguins reminded us of the penguins in the Old
Necronomicon.
Yeah, and it's just like, come on, like.
Yeah, I had that moment as well. Yeah, we should rename our podcast the Old Ones and just eat expired chicken wings. It's a Hot Ones reference.
Yes, no, I got that.
I know you got it, but I'm explaining it to our penguin viewers.
Okay. I'm glad you did.
Just kidding. But oh shit, Nick, what's that over there? It's like, oh no, it's like a fluffy, kind of smaller than a dog with a tail. It's like that monster from the Necronomicon. Sorry, I had to get it out.
Who's that Necronomicon?
It's a Japanese joke. The Necronomicon. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take myself out now with the garbage. Yeah. There was one scene, because we've been shitting on this book for 40 minutes, relentlessly. There was one scene also more at the beginning of the book that I liked, with the dogs. So they find these alien corpses preserved, and they notice the dogs really don't like them. They have sled dogs to pull them through the ice, and it's described how the dogs just go crazy being near these things. So they build a separate place for the dogs to keep them in, and even from there you can still hear them barking and going nuts. So that gives kind of first spooky hint of like, ooh, these things are, maybe they're either outerworldly, or at least there's something that, you know, animals can pick up on, that something's not right, which is that's kind of a cool foreshadow. I mean, it's pretty standard, but I still liked it. But then he does it like 10 times, like the exact same thing. Because he was like, and then we built another camp, and we went to the next camp, and again the dogs were going crazy, and then we were taking apart the new thing, and we were dissecting it and looking at its strange and firm meat, while the dogs were going crazy because they really didn't like these things.
We dare not put the dogs near the. We daren't put the dogs near it because they might destroy it. So we had to put them separately. Yeah.
It's like, ooh, what is this? This could be a wing, is what I thought as the dogs were barking loudly because they didn't like the thing. And he literally mentions this so many times that by the end of it, I'm like, okay, I fucking get it. The dogs don't
nauseating,
like it. Yeah, like do it once or twice, but then,
Yeah. Speaking of, to kind of go into things that I kind of liked. I mean, to be honest, I was actually, a lot of these, like, there were a lot of excerpts in this book that I was like, is this good writing or is this bad writing? Like, I just couldn't really.
Yeah.
Couldn't really figure out, like, personally. And one section that I actually did quite. There were two sections actually that I have picked out. One of them was the description of the Shoggoth, the smoke slime alien thing that chased them at the end. So basically, in this, where we are now, is they've come to this point in the city cave system where they've been stopped in their tracks, and in front of them they see the old ones, a couple of those dead barrel, vegetable, animal, alien things with the star head. Except they've been beheaded by this creature, which we're already kind of primed and told about, called the Shoggoth. And so, in a panic, they run away. So it describes from here, we had expected, upon looking back, to see a terrible and incredibly moving entity if the mists were thin enough. But of that entity we had formed a clear idea. What we did see, for the mists were indeed all too malignly thinned, was something altogether different and immeasurably more hideous and detestable. It was the utter objective embodiment of the fantastic novelist's thing that should not be, and its nearest comprehensible analogue is a vast, onrushing subway train, as one sees it from a station platform. The great black front looming colossally out of an infinite subterraneous distance, constellated with strangely coloured lights and filling the prodigious burrow as a piston fills a cylinder. So, this is kind of, good and bad, I think. We have in the beginning, this kind of, this thing that we've been railing against this whole time, which is, this was a really, really horrible, scary thing, and it was hideous and detestable, but I also can't really describe it. But this, and also, it was the utter objective embodiment of the fantastic novelist's thing that should not be, which just feels like such an obnoxious cop-out to be writing in a novel. But it's like, it was like that annoying trope of the authors where they don't really describe the thing that is happening, and you're like, you're just doing this yourself. But he does actually give, this cool kind of analogy of the subway train coming onto the platform, where you can kind of like sense this like form but you can't actually see it coming through the tunnel. I thought that was quite cool.
I guess so. It just kind of confused me more, I think, because I was turning every line break. I was looking like for a description of the monster, because we were told the Shaggoth is like a smoke monster. It's just like a cloud of smoke, and we don't really know how the inner part of it looks like. So I'm like, how does the monster look? How does the monster look? And he just goes on. It's like, the author is doing that annoying thing where he doesn't describe the thing, and it's like, it's what you're doing right now. Actually, fucking describe the monster. How does the monster look? And then he starts talking about trains, and it's like a train. It's like a subway train with the lights at the black front. And I'm like, okay, this is clearly an analogy. Just tell me how the monster looks. And then it's like not 2 paragraphs, but like 2 or 3 line breaks later, he's still talking about the train, and I'm like, does it actually look like a train? I'm genuinely confused now. It's like, is it Thomas the Tank Engine? Like, what's happening? just fucking tell me how it looks. Does it actually have lights? No, it probably doesn't. You just wanted to say that, right? You just wanted to say lights, because trains have lights.
Yeah, and then he does just like describe it as well. So then it's just kind of like, why have you even bothered to give this analogy if you're actually going to just describe it anyway? I don't know.
But what is the description?
So the description, so just carrying on from before, it says, but we were not on a station platform. We were on the track ahead as the nightmare plastic column of fetid black iridescence oozed tightly onward through its 15-foot sinus, gathering in holy speed and driving before it a spiral, rethickening cloud of the pallid abyss vapor. It was a terrible, indescribable thing, vaster than any subway train, a shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous and with myriads of temporary eyes, forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light all over the tunnel-filling front that bore down upon us, crushing the frantic penguins and slithering over the glistening floor that it and its kind had swept so evilly free of all litter.
Okay, so what I got from that is cloud, black, eyes, bubbles. But I have...
Yeah.
This just looks like a kind of effect that's around it, right? Like, it sounds like there's a monster, and then around it is like a cloud of smoke. But I still don't really know how the thing looks, to be honest. I don't know. Is it just like a slime of eyeballs that like goes forward? I don't know.
There is something really wrong or really off about the way that Lovecraft describes things here. I think also, like, as well, like this, like, he's giving this like quite close up, well, kind of close up, kind of. I mean that like it's detailed, like talking about the detail, like eyes, for example. That's like a very like, you have to be. It's a very like close up detail of something. But then he's talking about like how it's just like crushing the frantic penguins.
But if it's a cloud of smoke, like how does it crush anything, right? So that's...
But beyond, I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is like we go from like these very close details to suddenly we don't know anything about this really about the scale of it. I guess he says it's a 15-foot sinus, but yeah, it's clouds. So like, or is it? I don't know. Like, it's like slime cloud thing, and then it said that it's crushing these penguins, but like we don't have any sense of like the weight of the thing itself. So it just, I don't know. It just feels really off. There's something really off about it. I don't really know what it is, but
also, this is a minor point, but during the lead up, it was frequently mentioned that there was a smell of petrol, and like, they had like tin cans and stuff, that the tin cans were broken open, like, and scattered around. The monster ate the cans or something, but that never really seemed to connect back to anything, did it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the petrol was linked to, they found like this camp, which I didn't even know. I guess it was Luke's. It's not really even clear, like lake. Sorry, yeah, it's not even really clear, like what is. So I mean, what they discover, like, yeah, all these empty tin cans and stuff that have been like inexplicably like torn open, and they find this old encampment inside the city, which was like fairly recently abandoned, and they find that there's like a can of petrol there, but like. Who did that? Like, it wasn't lake in that, right?
It doesn't connect to anything. Yeah.
Like, were like the aliens? Like, did they come back alive or something? I just don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of kind of not story wise, but just like environmental storytelling wise, a lot of loose ends that didn't really seem to loop back to anything, and then. Yeah. Okay, and so finally, what Nick started the podcast with, what is this screaming sound?
Do I have to do it again?
You have to do it again, because I can't be loud right now.
Tekeli! That's the eldritch mocking cry.
Yeah.
Wait, Tekeli. My bad.
Like a kind of birdish sounding cry. This smoke monster apparently makes apparently like bird noises, and it was so weird. Again with this Necronomicon shit, because he's like, "Oh my god, that's exactly the sound that they make in the Necronomicon," and it's like, how did you read the words like tickly on a page, and then you heard that, and you were like, "That's exactly how that's spelled."
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
So yeah, it just also wasn't scary. Just was not a scary sound. I think that's why you open with it in like a kind of joke, because it's just not a scary sound.
It does just sound stupid. Yeah, saying it aloud, like Tekalili, I'm so scared.
And then on the way home, the guy in the plane, he kept repeating it, and it's like,
yeah. It's like, all right.
That was another thing that's mentioned at the beginning and at the end, that this guy Daneforth, apparently he saw something even scarier than the main guy saw, and that's why he's so traumatized. But we'll just never know what he saw.
Yeah, he's.
But
never
it must have been really scary.
Yeah, I was so disappointed by this book, to be honest. And to be kind of honestly, I was never like super like excited about this idea of like unspeakable horror or like incomprehensible horror that like the whole eldritch creature thing and the whole, Lovecraft thing talks about. And I feel like I've had that confirmed through reading.
I was kind of into it at the beginning of this book for just the setting and the feeling of it. And and then I'm also willing to give Lovecraft another shot. Maybe should read something more mainstream of his.
Sure.
So, yeah, but I know what you mean. Yeah,
I would definitely be keen to read one of his like more kind of popularly accepted works. But yeah, if it's anything like this, then I don't think I'll be reading anymore.
Piccoli.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like he wanted to describe this world that he dreamt up so much that he kind of forgot to write about the characters and the scene in the novel, and it just kind of went into like these monologues where it felt very out of character for our main protagonist to go off on all these tangents about the Necronomicon, and it kind of felt like Lovecraft was doing his own thing right now, and he kind of forgot that he was writing a novel. He just really wanted to explain how cool these aliens are.
Yeah. And which really just the most boring parts of the book were those. Yeah, like,
for sure.
I'm going to explain the whole history of these aliens because
deduced from this cave painting.
Yeah, which I can apparently read completely without any problem, even though, we've only been in these caves for, a few hours, and I've managed to deduce the whole history of these aliens, and including the names, the names of these different creatures. Like, how do you read them? Like, they're not in. There's no alphabet. It's not going to be written in the alphabet, right? Like,
yeah.
And that really just pissed me off. Like, probably more than anything else was this stupid and then the sculptures ended up literally being the way of explaining any little piece of information he wanted to give to you.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was, backed up by the fact that he'd seen it on the sculptures now. So it's like, okay, well, I would have believed you anyway. You don't have to refer to these sculptures that you've seen. You can just say stuff. Or why is there this constant, incessant need to reference anything observed in this book to either the Necronomicon or these sculptures, as if they can't just exist by themselves and be interesting or intriguing or scary? There's no need for you to just constantly be this thing is also here, so therefore it's more scary, or it's just so frustrating.
I hope that one day when you become a dad and your child draws a little monster or something on and put the painting on the fridge, then you make a 2-hour podcast about how the inner mythology makes no sense, and it's really frustrating. No, but I totally know what you mean. It's just, this podcast has just been such a shit fest of us, because I didn't even hate the book that much, but talking about it now, I feel like I hated it more than I felt when I read it.
Right.
And it was definitely a chore, though. Which, if for a very short book that's supposed to be scary, being a chore is not reading it like it's a chore. That's not a good thing ever. So
no. I mean, you can, if it's a longer book, you can tolerate having sections which are not particularly exciting, but in a short book like this, and I mean, we say short book, it is considered like a novella or like a short novel, but I don't think it was that much different in length to Hill House. It was a bit shorter, I guess, but
yeah, I had a PDF version with big pages, which had 100 pages, but in a little pocketbook format, it could be 220 or something.
Yeah, but maybe he intended on writing a short book in the short novel in the beginning, and this is just what happened, because this could definitely be probably half as long. and be better for it as well, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've shat on this book a lot in this episode, and because I was like actually just really annoyed by it in the end. But I completely agree with you that the beginning of the book was really, really excellent, and you can like really feel his love and interest for navigation and like all these old expeditions and stuff. And I just thought
he definitely did some research.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, like, 1930s setting for this weird, creepy story. It felt so grounded, and it felt so real, and was just so burdened by, in the end,
unburdened by what has been.
It was so burdened by this, like, unexplained need to reference everything to this Necronomicon and everything, to just explaining away everything. That it really, really spoiled it for me.
Well summarized. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, I guess we will leave it there then.
Yeah, I think we've become more snobby as we've read more on this podcast.
Maybe it might just be because it's early and I'm in a bad mood. I think it's
okay.
I think it's still probably worth a read. Maybe there are better Lovecraft books to recommend. And we will probably revisit Lovecraft at some point in the future.
Yeah, not all chaff, but more chaff than wheat.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for listening, and join us in the next one.
The old one. Ooh.
Take a little.
Take a leak. Take a leak.
Take a shit. Take a shit. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.